Thalia stood with her eyes downcast, as she had been trained since childhood. The emerald skin that marked her verdant heritage gleamed under the harsh market lights. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a tight, regulation braid that emphasized her elongated ears and the intricate patterns of lighter green that adorned her temples. Batch T394, female, age 23 standard cycles, professionally trained in domestic services, entertainment, and basic medical care. The Kalian auctioneer's voice was monotonous, as though reading a list of appliance specifications. Excellent health, no defects, and verified obedience rating of 9.8. Thalia didn't flinch at being described like machinery. This was normal. She was property, after all. Born to a verdant servant mother who had died in childbirth, she had been raised in the Kalian breeding facilities until age 7, then transferred to the training academies where she'd learned her place in the galactic hierarchy. The Kalians, tall, gray-skinned beings with 4 arms and compound eyes, had conquered the verdant homeworld centuries ago. Now her people existed solely to serve as a commodity, prized for their intelligence, longevity, and adaptability. Bidding begins at 50,000 credits, the auctioneer announced. Thalia's current owner, Administrator Vexilla, had decided to liquidate his assets before taking a political position in the Kalian High Council. After 8 years in his household, Thalia was being sold again. She had learned not to form attachments. The crowd was typical for the upscale auction house on Nexus Station: wealthy merchants, political figures, and the occasional off-worlder seeking exotic servants. But one figure stood out: a human. Humans were rare in this sector, having only joined the galactic community 30 years ago. They were known for their strange ideals about freedom and equality, concepts Thalia had been taught were dangerous and impractical. The bidding proceeded quickly. The human remained silent until the price reached 85,000 credits, then raised his hand. 90,000, he said, his voice carrying an accent Thalia had never heard before. The auctioneer's compound eyes swiveled toward him. The human offers 90,000. Do I hear 95? A Kalian noble raised one of his 4 hands. 95,000. 100,000, the human countered immediately. The crowd murmured. Humans were known to be wealthy. Their technological innovations had earned them a place in galactic commerce despite their primitive social structures, but they rarely purchased servants. 100,000 from the human, going once, going twice, sold. Thalia felt a moment of panic. What would service to a human be like? The training academies had taught little about them, only that they were unpredictable and emotional. After the transaction was completed, the human approached her holding her ownership chip. He was tall for his species, with olive skin and dark, curly hair. His eyes were an unusual amber color that seemed to catch the light. "My name is Marcus Jensen," he said, his voice softer than it had been during the bidding. "I'm a trader from Earth." "This one acknowledges her new owner," Thalia responded with the ritual phrase, eyes still lowered. Marcus frowned slightly. "Look at me, please." Surprised by the please, Kalians never used such terms with property. Thalia raised her eyes. "There you are," he said with a small smile. "We're going to my ship now, follow me." As they walked through the crowded station, Thalia noted that Marcus didn't put her on a leash or activate the tracking perimeter on her collar, as was customary. He simply walked beside her, occasionally glancing back to make sure she was still following. His ship was small but well-maintained, a trader's vessel with modest living quarters. Once aboard, Marcus turned to her with an expression she couldn't interpret. "First things first," he said, taking out a small device. "This collar needs to go." Thalia's eyes widened in shock. The compliance collar was a permanent fixture for all servants. Removing it was unthinkable. "But sir," she whispered, "that's illegal." Marcus's smile was unlike any she'd seen on a Kalian face. "Not in human space, it isn't, and that's where we're headed." The collar fell away with a soft click. Thalia's hand instinctively went to her neck, fingers tracing the faint indentation where the device had rested for 16 years. Her pulse raced with a mixture of fear and something unfamiliar, something that made her chest feel unexpectedly light. "There," Marcus said, tossing the collar into a disposal unit. "That's better." Thalia remained frozen, her training battling with the sudden, jarring reality. Without her collar, the Kalians could no longer track her, no longer deliver correctional shocks if she failed to follow commands properly. The implications were too vast to comprehend. "Sir, I don't understand," she whispered. "Marcus," he corrected gently. "Call me Marcus, and what should I call you?" She blinked in confusion. "This one is designated T394. His amber eyes clouded. "That's not a name, that's an inventory number. What's your actual name?" "Thalia," she admitted, the syllables feeling strange on her tongue. She hadn't spoken her birth name aloud since her first year at the training academy. "My mother named me Thalia." "Thalia," Marcus repeated, smiling. "That's beautiful, it suits you." The ship hummed around them as it prepared for departure. Marcus gestured toward a small cabin. "This is your room? There's a shower unit inside, and I've left some clothes that might fit. We'll get you more when we reach Demeter Station." My room? Thalia had never had private quarters. In Administrator Vexilla's household, she had slept in a designated service alcove. "Yes, your room, with a door that locks from the inside." He pointed to the control panel. "No one can enter without your permission, not even me." Thalia felt dizzy. Nothing in her training had prepared her for this situation. She had been taught to anticipate an owner's needs, to be invisible until required, to accept any use of her person or skills without question. But this human seemed to be following none of the expected protocols. "I don't understand what service you require of me," she finally said. Marcus ran a hand through his curly hair. "I don't require service, Thalia. I bought your contract to free you." The concept was so alien that her mind initially rejected it. "Free, but Verdans are not. We cannot." "In human space, sentient ownership is illegal," Marcus explained, leaning against the bulkhead. "Has been for centuries. When I saw you at that auction, I couldn't just leave you there." "But you spent 100,000 credits," she protested. "Credits can be earned back," he shrugged. "A person's dignity is priceless." The ship announced departure clearance, and Marcus excused himself to the control room. Left alone, Thalia cautiously entered her assigned cabin. It was small but comfortable, with a real bed instead of a sleep platform, and a viewport showing the glittering expanse of Nexus Station slowly receding. She touched the clothes laid out on the bed, simple garments, but made of soft fabrics in colors she would never have been permitted to wear under Kalian rule. Servants wore gray or muted blue, never vibrant colors that might draw attention. The shower was another revelation. Hot water, actual water instead of sonic pulses, and no timer limiting her to the regulation 3 minutes. She stood under the spray until her emerald skin flushed a deeper shade of green, washing away the scented oils the auction house had applied to make her more appealing to buyers. When she emerged, she dressed in the strange clothes, loose pants and a tunic in a deep teal that complemented her skin, and hesitantly ventured out to find Marcus. He was in the small galley, preparing what appeared to be food. Actual food, not the nutrient paste that had been her standard fare. "Perfect timing," he said. "Hope you like pasta. It's one of the few Earth dishes I can make without setting off the fire suppression system." "I've never had Earth food," she admitted. "Well, consider this your first official act as a free woman, choosing whether you want to try it or not." Thalia stared at the steaming plate he offered. "I can refuse." "Of course." His expression grew serious. "Thalia, from now on, everything is your choice. What you eat, what you wear, where you go, what you do. I know this is overwhelming and it will take time to adjust, but I promise you no one will ever own you again." She took the plate with trembling hands, the aroma unlike anything in her experience. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "My great-grandmother was born in the last days of human slavery on Earth. She lived to be 103, and she made sure we never forgot what freedom cost. When humans joined the galactic community and discovered slavery still existed. Well, some of us can't stand by and do nothing." Thalia took a cautious bite of the food and was startled by the explosion of flavors. She had never tasted anything so complex, so enjoyable. "It's good," she said, the simple statement feeling like a revelation. For the first time in her life, she had been asked for an opinion and she had given it, not to please someone else but because it was true. Marcus smiled, and something unfamiliar stirred in Thalia's chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with fear or submission. "Tomorrow we'll reach Demeter Station," he said. "It's in a neutral zone, so you'll be safe there while you decide what you want to do next." What I want, she repeated, the concept still bewildering. I don't know what I want. That's okay, Marcus assured her. For the first time in your life, you have all the time you need to figure it out. The stars streaked past the viewport as the ship entered hyperspace, carrying Thalia away from everything she had ever known, toward a future she had never dared to imagine. Demeter Station hung like a jeweled ring against the backdrop of a gas giant, its sprawling habitation modules connected by transparent walkways that glittered with lights. After 2 weeks there, Thalia still found herself pausing at viewports, captivated by the sight. No one rushed her along or punished her for the momentary indulgence of admiring beauty. "You're starring again," Marcus said, his voice warm with amusement as he joined her. "It's still strange," she replied, "to look at something simply because I want to." In the weeks since her liberation, Thalia had begun to shed the rigid behaviors ingrained by her training. She no longer walked 3 paces behind Marcus. She made eye contact during conversations. She had opinions, tentative at first, but growing stronger each day. "I have something for you," Marcus said, handing her a small data tablet. "Your official documentation. According to the United Earth Coalition, you're now recognized as a free citizen with asylum status." Thalia's fingers trembled as she took the tablet. Her image appeared beside information that designated her as a person, not property. "Is this real?" "Completely legal and binding in human space and neutral territories," Marcus confirmed. "The Kalians won't recognize it, of course, but they have no jurisdiction here." "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate for the gift he had given her. They walked through the station's central marketplace, a cacophony of sights, sounds, and scents from dozens of worlds. Thalia had chosen her own clothing that morning, an indigo jumpsuit that complemented her emerald skin, with a matching band holding back her platinum hair, which she now wore loose instead of in the severe regulation braid. "What would you like to do today?" Marcus asked, another question that still startled her with its implication of choice. "I'd like to visit the Arboretum again," she said. The vast garden dome had become her favorite place on the station, filled with plants from across the galaxy. Something about the growing things, each reaching freely toward the artificial sunlight, resonated deeply with her. As they walked, Marcus's hand occasionally brushed against hers, sending an unfamiliar sensation across her skin. She had been touched countless times before, inspected, directed, used, but never with this gentle, almost hesitant quality that seemed to ask rather than take. In the Arboretum, they found a secluded bench among flowering trees from Earth called cherry blossoms. Pink petals drifted down around them like fragrant snow. "I've been thinking," Marcus said after a comfortable silence. "My trading contract here ends in a week. I'll be heading to New Cascadia next." Thalia felt a sudden tightness in her chest. "Oh. You have options," he continued. "You could stay here on Demeter. There's a Verdant refugee community, and with your documents you could apply for work or education grants. Or," he hesitated, "you could come with me." The tightness in her chest transformed into something flutter-like, something she had no name for. "You want me to come with you?" "Only if you want to," he said quickly. "As my friend and my equal, not as—" "I know," she interrupted, surprising herself with the boldness. "I know what you mean." Marcus smiled, relief evident in his amber eyes. "New Cascadia is beautiful. It was one of the first extrasolar colonies with actual forests and oceans. My family has a place there." "Family," Thalia echoed. The concept was abstract to her. Verdant's servants were separated from their birth parents immediately, raised collectively by designated caregivers who showed no affection. "They'd love you," he said softly, then cleared his throat. "I mean, they'd welcome you. My sister runs a rehabilitation program for former slaves. She could help you explore career options, education." "And what would you be doing?" Thalia asked. "I have a research position waiting. Xenobotany, studying plant life from different worlds. It's what I was trained for before I started trading." Thalia thought about this. Marcus had never mentioned his background before. "You became a trader to find people like me, didn't you? To free them." He nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "I've bought 14 contracts over the past 3 years. You're the only Verdant, though. Most were Peldari or Tresians." "Where are they now?" "Living their own lives, some on Earth, some on colonies. One became a pilot, another is studying medicine." His eyes met hers. "Every one of them chose their own path." The realization that she was part of something larger, not just a solitary act of kindness but a deliberate mission, filled Thalia with a strange warmth. She reached out, hesitantly placing her hand over his. It was the first time she had initiated contact. His skin was warmer than hers, the alien heat somehow comforting. "I want to go with you," she said. That evening back in her quarters, Thalia stood before the mirror, studying her reflection. In Kalian society, servants were never permitted mirrors. Appearance was the master's concern, not the property's. Now she took in the subtle patterns on her green skin, the slight point of her ears, the unusual amber of her eyes that, strangely, matched Marcus's so perfectly despite their different species. When the door chimed, she knew who it was. "Enter," she called, another small freedom, controlling access to her space. Marcus stepped inside, then stopped, his eyes widening slightly as he looked at her. "You cut your hair," he observed. Thalia ran her fingers through the platinum strands, now falling just below her shoulders instead of to her waist. "Yes, this length is my choice, not a requirement." He smiled. "It suits you." "Marcus," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "there's something I need to understand." "Anything. Why do you look at me the way you do?" The question had been building in her for days as she'd noticed his gaze lingering, then quickly shifting away when she caught him. Color rose in his cheeks. "I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable." "You didn't," she assured him, moving closer. "I just need to know if what I'm feeling, if it's what I think it is." The space between them seemed charged with invisible energy. "What are you feeling?" he asked, his voice low. "Like gravity has shifted, like there's a pull toward you that I can't explain." She placed a hand over her heart. "Like something here wakes up when you're near." Marcus's breath caught. "Thalia, I never intended. I didn't free you to." "I know," she interrupted again, finding confidence in her certainty. "That's why I trust you. That's why I can say this." She took another step closer. "I've never been allowed to want anything before, but I want this. I want to know what it means to be close to someone by choice." His hand, trembling slightly, reached up to touch her cheek. "Are you sure?" In answer, Thalia leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. Her first kiss, her first true act of intimacy not born of obligation, but of genuine desire. When they parted, the wonder in his eyes mirrored what she felt expanding within her own heart, an awakening more profound than freedom itself. New Cascadia lived up to its name. Vast forests of emerald and jade stretched across rolling mountains, punctuated by thundering waterfalls that fed crystal lakes. For Thalia, who had spent her life on space stations and in sterile Kalian compounds, the raw vitality of an untamed world was intoxicating. 3 months had passed since they had arrived at Marcus's family estate, a modest but beautiful home perched on a cliff overlooking the northern sea. His family had welcomed her with an acceptance that still amazed her. His mother Alana with warm hugs that Thalia initially flinched from but now treasured. His sister Dani with practical guidance on adapting to free society. His father Thomas with quiet respect that acknowledged her intelligence rather than her utility. "You're getting better at this," Marcus observed as Thalia carefully extracted a soil sample from the root system of a luminescent fungus they had discovered in the forest. "I had extensive biological training," she reminded him. "Administrator Vexilla kept rare plants. I was responsible for their care." "Yet another thing he didn't deserve," Marcus muttered, then smiled apologetically. "Sorry, I promised not to dwell on your past." Thalia placed the sample in a containment unit. "It's fine. The past shaped me, but it doesn't own me anymore." She straightened, brushing dirt from her field suit. "Besides, I'm using those skills by choice now. That makes all the difference." They worked in comfortable silence, documenting the unusual fungal network. In the past weeks, Thalia had become Marcus's research partner, her keen observations and meticulous nature complementing his more intuitive approach. Together, they were mapping New Cascadia's unique ecosystem, work that was both meaningful and entirely of her choosing. Later that evening, they returned to the house, samples carefully stored and initial findings logged. A storm was brewing over the sea, dark clouds gathering on the horizon, mirroring the contentment gathering in Thalia's heart. Marcus pulled her close as they stood on the wide porch, his arms encircling her from behind as they watched lightning dance across the distant waves. The casual intimacy still thrilled her, touch without command, closeness born of desire rather than duty. "I love watching you work," he murmured against her hair. Your focus, your precision, the way you lose yourself in discovery. She turned in his arms, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. I love feeling useful without feeling used. Their relationship had deepened gradually over the months, each step forward taken deliberately, each boundary crossed only when Thalia felt truly ready. Marcus never pushed, never assumed, making each intimate moment a genuine choice rather than an obligation. The previous night had been their first time making love, a culmination of trust and desire that had left Thalia breathless with the revelation that physical connection could be so profound, so mutual. Her body, once merely an asset to be utilized by owners, had become a source of joy and pleasure that belonged to her alone, to share only as she chose. We should go in, Marcus said reluctantly as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Mother's making her famous stew tonight. They had just stepped inside when the communication system chimed with an urgent alert. Marcus frowned, moving to the console in the main room. That's strange, he muttered. It's a security notification from the landing port. Someone's requesting authorization to approach the property. Thalia felt a sudden chill. Who would come in this weather? The answer materialized on the screen, a Kalian diplomatic shuttle. It's probably nothing, Marcus said, but his tightened jaw betrayed his concern. They might be here about trade regulations. My father sometimes consults with foreign delegations. But Thomas, entering from his study, shook his head grimly. I'm not expecting any Kalian representatives. He studied the authorization request. They're specifically asking to speak with the property owner about a recovered asset. The old Verdun word for property, asset, sent ice through Thalia's veins. They can't take you, Marcus said fiercely, taking her trembling hand. Your asylum status is recognized by the Coalition. This is sovereign human territory. But the Kalians don't recognize our laws regarding sentient ownership, Thomas reminded them, his expression grave. They consider it interference in their cultural practices. Alana and Danny joined them, concern etched on their faces as Thomas explained the situation. We won't let them near her, Danny declared, her normally calm demeanor hardened with resolve. The Liberation Network has protocols for this. Before they could discuss further, the console chimed again. This time, a familiar face appeared on the screen, Administrator Vexilla, his compound eyes gleaming with cold determination. Greetings, humans, he said, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into flat standard. I'm here to retrieve stolen property. Batch T-394 belongs to the Kalian Servant Registry and was illegally removed from Nexus Station. Return it immediately or face severe diplomatic consequences. Marcus stepped forward, shielding Thalia from the screen. There is no property to return. Thalia is a free citizen under Coalition protection. Vexilla's mandibles twitched in what Thalia recognized as amusement. Humans and their quaint notions of universal rights. Your Coalition has no authority over Kalian assets. I have documentation proving ownership, and the trade agreement your species so eagerly signed gives me the right to reclaim stolen goods. She's not goods, Marcus snapped. She's a person. A legal technicality we can debate after you surrender the Verdun, Vexilla replied smoothly. I'm authorized to offer compensation for any inconvenience. 50,000 credits seems fair for temporary usage. Thalia stepped around Marcus, facing her former owner directly. I will not return, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Vexilla's compound eyes focused on her with cold intensity. T-394, you are malfunctioning. Report for correction immediately. The familiar command phrases triggered something deep in her conditioning, a momentary impulse to obey that she fought with all her newfound strength. My name is Thalia, she responded, and I am not malfunctioning, I am free. This delusion will be corrected, Vexilla said dismissively. Humans, you have one planetary rotation to surrender the Verdun, or I will file formal charges of property theft with the Galactic Concord. The penalties include trade sanctions against your colony and substantial reparations. The screen went dark. In the silence that followed, the storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows like a physical manifestation of the threat looming over them. Can they really do this? Thalia whispered. Thomas sighed heavily. The trade agreement is complicated. We needed Kalian technology, and they insisted on provisions protecting their property rights. But there are exceptions for sentient beings, Danny argued. The Coalition has been fighting for those interpretations for years. And losing in the conquered courts, Thomas admitted. The Kalians have powerful allies. Marcus took Thalia's hands, his eyes fierce with determination. It doesn't matter, we won't let them take you, we'll figure this out. But as the storm raged outside, Thalia felt the fragile new life she had built beginning to crack beneath the weight of a past she had never truly escaped. Dawn broke over New Cascadia, the storm having passed during the night, leaving the world washed clean and glistening. Thalia stood alone on the cliff edge near the house, watching the sunrise paint the horizon in shades of amber and gold that reminded her of Marcus's eyes. The Jensen family had spent most of the night in urgent discussion, contacting coalition officials, legal advisors, and members of Danny's Liberation Network. Options had been presented, strategies debated. Through it all, they had treated the crisis as their own, this family that had welcomed a stranger into their midst without hesitation. But in the quiet hours before dawn, Thalia had reached a clarity that transcended their well-intentioned plans. She heard footsteps behind her and knew without turning that it was Marcus. His presence had become something she could feel, like a change in atmospheric pressure. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, joining her at the cliff edge. "Vexilla could have surveillance drones." "I needed to think," she replied, still gazing at the horizon. "And I needed to see this, one more sunrise in freedom." "Don't talk like that," Marcus said sharply, taking her hand. "You're not going back to them, we have options. Danny's contacts could smuggle us to the outer colonies beyond Kalian reach, or we could fight this legally. The Coalition's Justice Ministry is sending a representative." Thalia turned to face him, memorizing the features that had become so dear to her. The determined set of his jaw, the tiny scar above his left eyebrow, the way concern creased his forehead. "I won't run," she said with quiet conviction, "and I won't let your family suffer for helping me." "Thalia." "Listen to me, Marcus." She placed her palm against his cheek. "All my life, choices were made for me. What to eat, where to sleep, who to serve. You gave me freedom, but freedom isn't just about pleasure and comfort. It's about responsibility, the weight of making your own decisions, even the difficult ones." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by alarm. "No, you can't be considering going back to them." "Not as property," she clarified, "but I must face Vexilla, on my terms, not his." Before Marcus could argue further, Thomas called to them from the house. Vexilla's shuttle had been detected approaching the landing pad. Inside, the Jensen family had gathered in the main room. Alana handed Thalia a small device. "Emergency beacon," she explained. "If things go wrong, activate it. We have friends in the Coalition Navy who will respond. Treaty violations be damned." Danny embraced her fiercely. "You don't have to do this." "I do," Thalia replied, returning the embrace. Through the windows, they watched the Kalian shuttle land in the cleared area near the house. The main hatch opened, and Administrator Vexilla emerged, flanked by 2 enforcement drones, hovering spheres equipped with restraint fields and correctional probes. "Let me go out first," Thalia said. "Alone." "Absolutely not," Marcus protested. "Please," she implored, "trust me to make my own choice." The wordless communication that passed between them spoke volumes about how far they had come together. Finally, Marcus nodded, though every line of his body radiated tension. Thalia stepped out onto the porch, her back straight, her chin lifted. She wore human clothing, a simple tunic and pants in deep green that matched her skin, rather than the gray uniform of a Kalian servant. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, still shorter than regulation length. Vexilla's compound eyes fixed on her, mandibles clicking with disapproval at her appearance. "T-394, you will return to the shuttle immediately for processing and reconditioning." "My name is Thalia," she replied, her voice carrying in the clear morning air. "And I will not be returning with you, Administrator." The Kalian's upper arms twitched in irritation. "This behavior confirms the extent of your malfunction. The human influence has corrupted your programming." He gestured to the enforcement drones. "Restrain the asset." The drones advanced, but Thalia stood her ground. "I invoke Article 7 of the Galactic Concord," she announced. "The right of sentient self-determination." The drones halted, their programming requiring them to pause at the formal invocation of Concord law. Vexilla clicked in annoyance. Irrelevant, he dismissed. Verdans are classified as servant-class entities exempt from Article 7 protections. That classification is based on genetic manipulation performed by the Kalian Empire centuries ago, Thalia countered. Manipulation designed specifically to circumvent sentient rights protections. Marcus and his family emerged from the house, staying behind her but present in silent support. Thomas stepped forward, holding a data pad. "We've filed an emergency petition with the Concord Court," he said. "Genetic evidence proving the Verdan were a free species before Kalian interference. Evidence your empire has suppressed for generations." Vexilla's compound eyes swiveled between them. "Meaningless. The courts will take years to review such a petition. In the meantime, my property rights remain valid." "Perhaps," Thalia acknowledged. "But the petition triggers an automatic stay on reclamation until preliminary hearings can be held. You cannot legally force me to return with you today, Administrator." Vexilla's mandibles clattered in fury. "You speak like a lawyer, not a servant, further proof of your malfunction." "No," Thalia replied calmly. "Proof of my true nature, the nature your empire has suppressed. I was born to think, to learn, to choose, not to serve." She took a step closer to the Kalian, refusing to be intimidated by his height or his anger. "I have one more thing to show you, Administrator, something that might help you understand." From her pocket, she withdrew a small vial containing a luminescent fungal sample, the one she and Marcus had collected the previous day. "Do you recognize this species?" she asked. Vexilla's posture changed subtly, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his anger. "Impossible. That appears to be Lumina's mycelium. It went extinct on the Verdan homeworld during the occupation." "Yet here it is, thriving on a human world," Thalia said, "adapting, evolving, finding new ways to exist despite attempts to control it." She placed the vial back in her pocket. "Like me." "Poetic but irrelevant," Vexilla snapped. "The law." "The law provides options," Marcus interrupted, stepping forward to stand beside Thalia, "including financial settlement." Vexilla's compound eyes focused on him. "You wish to purchase the asset properly this time? The price has increased significantly due to your interference." "Not purchase," Marcus corrected. "Compensate for technical breach of contract while the Concord Court determines Thalia's ultimate status." Thomas added, "We're prepared to offer 3 times the auction price as a bond pending legal resolution. The funds would be held in escrow, released to you only if the court rules in your favor." Economic calculation flickered across Vexilla's alien features. Thalia recognized the expression. The administrator had always valued profit above principle. 5 times the auction price, Vexilla countered, and formal recognition that the Kalian Empire disputes the petition's validity. "Agreed," Thomas said, "provided Thalia receives interim protected status and cannot be claimed by any Kalian representative until final adjudication." The negotiation continued, precise legal language flowing back and forth. Thalia watched with a strange sense of detachment. Her former owner was haggling over her as if she were still property, yet paradoxically, each term brought her closer to recognized freedom. Finally, agreement was reached. Documents were transmitted, verified, and sealed with diplomatic codes. Vexilla turned to Thalia one last time. "You have changed," he observed, his tone almost scientific. "Fascinating but disturbing. The other Verdans will hear of this. Rebellion." "Good," Thalia replied simply. With a final irritated click, Vexilla returned to his shuttle, the enforcement drones following. Moments later, the vessel lifted off, disappearing into the clear blue sky. Silence fell over the cliff top. Then Danny whooped triumphantly, throwing an arm around Thalia's shoulders. "You were magnificent, the look on his face when you cited Article 7. Ilana embraced her next. "So proud of you, dear." Thomas was already on his communication device, discussing next steps with coalition officials. The legal battle ahead would be lengthy, complex, and expensive, but the immediate danger had passed. Marcus stood apart, watching Thalia with an expression that mingled pride, love, and lingering concern. She moved to him, taking both his hands in hers. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "I'm more than all right," she assured him. "For the first time, I faced my past without flinching. I stood my ground not because someone else told me to, but because I chose to." "You were incredible," he said, drawing her close, "but I was terrified he would take you." Thalia smiled, a genuine expression that still felt new on her face. "He never could have taken me, not really. You taught me that freedom isn't just a legal status. It's something inside that no one can remove once it takes root." Over his shoulder, she watched the sun climbing higher in the sky, illuminating the vast forests and distant mountains of New Cascadia. Her new home, her chosen home. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, his arms warm around her. Thalia thought about the long legal battle ahead, about the other Verdans still in servitude who might hear of her stand, about the research she and Marcus had only just begun, about the life they were building together. "Now," she said, meeting his gaze with newfound certainty, "I choose our future, one day at a time." As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Thalia felt the weight of her past finally begin to lift. She had been property, then protected, and now she was something else entirely. A woman making her own path, loving by choice rather than command, standing tall in her freedom not just because it had been given to her, but because she had claimed it as her own. The emerald skin that had once marked her as a commodity now simply made her uniquely herself. Thalia, no longer owned, but truly cherished.